The classroom buzzed with energy as the final bell rang. Chairs scraped against the floor, and students rushed to grab their backpacks, excited to leave for the weekend. But one boy, sitting near the window, didn't move. His name was Tommy. Tommy was quiet, always quiet. He liked to line up his pencils before class started. He covered his ears when things got too loud. And sometimes, when the teacher changed the routine, Tommy would cry. Not because he was a baby, but because his brain didn't like surprises. Everyone knew Tommy was different, and no one teased him more than Greg. Greg leaned back in his chair and smirked. He was tall for a 12-year-old, with sandy brown hair and a voice louder than most. He played football and made jokes that others laughed at even when they hurt people. "Hey Tommy," Greg shouted across the room. "You counting your crayons again?" Some of the kids laughed. Tommy looked down and didn't say anything. Greg stood up and walked over, arms crossed. "Seriously, man, what planet are you from?" Mr. Sullivan, their teacher, looked up sharply from his desk. "Greg, enough." Greg shrugged and walked out, high-fiving a friend on the way. To him, it was just another joke he didn't understand. Not really. He never asked why Tommy flinched when people touched him. He never cared why Tommy never looked him in the eye. Greg just thought he was weird. In his mind, Tommy wasn't normal. And if you weren't normal, you didn't belong. That year, another boy joined the school. His name was Caleb. Caleb had autism too, just like Tommy. He didn't show it the same way. Caleb could speak fine, but he didn't like loud noises. He wore headphones in class. He tapped his fingers on the table when he was nervous. Greg made fun of him too. "What's with the ear muffs, bro?" Greg would say, loud enough for everyone to hear. Even when teachers scolded him, Greg would just roll his eyes. "Relax, it's just a joke," he'd say. He didn't think twice about it. In high school, Greg stayed the same. He was popular, dated girls, played sports, hung out at parties. People laughed when he told stories about the weird kids from middle school. He'd mimic how Tommy used to flap his hands or how Caleb jumped when someone slammed a locker. Everyone around Greg just accepted it. They didn't see the harm. No one told him to stop. Life moved on. Greg graduated. He got a job at a car dealership. Started dating a girl named Stephanie. She was sweet, smart, and grounded. A nurse. The kind of girl who saw goodness in people, even when it was buried deep. After 2 years, they got married in a small church outside Denver. And then, not long after that, Stephanie was pregnant. Greg was over the moon. He painted the nursery himself light green with little clouds. He bought baby books, attended every appointment, and bragged to his coworkers that he was going to be the best dad in the world. The day their son was born, Greg cried. He held him close, kissed his tiny forehead, and whispered, "You're perfect, little man." They named him Aiden. At first, everything seemed fine. Aiden was quiet. Yes, but so are some babies. He smiled sometimes. He liked to lie on the carpet and watch the light on the ceiling spin. Greg loved to lie next to him, pointing at toys, making silly faces. Sometimes Aiden laughed. Sometimes he didn't. When Aiden turned 2, Stephanie noticed some things. "He doesn't look at me when I call his name," she said softly one night. Greg shrugged. "He's just focused. He's got your brains." Stephanie didn't laugh. "He doesn't talk much either. He'll talk when he's ready," Greg said. But at the checkup, the doctor frowned. He asked if Aiden pointed at things. He didn't. Asked if he responded to his name. He didn't. Asked if he played pretend games or waved goodbye. "He prefers to play alone," Stephanie admitted. Greg stayed quiet. They were referred to a specialist. Greg sat in the office, arms crossed, bouncing his knee, listening as the woman in glasses with a clipboard spoke gently. "Aiden shows several signs of autism spectrum disorder." The room spun. Greg stared at her. "Autism?" She nodded. "He's not broken. He just sees and understands the world differently." Greg's mouth felt dry. He looked over at his son, who sat on the floor, spinning the wheels on a toy car over and over. Just watching the spin, It hit him like a wave, the pencils, the headphones, the flapping hands, the kids he had laughed at, the ones he had mocked. Now his son was one of them. That night, Greg couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing his own voice from years ago. You counting your crayons again? He remembered laughing when Caleb wore headphones in class. He remembered calling him Robot Boy. He felt sick. Stephanie reached over and touched his arm. We'll be okay, she whispered. But Greg didn't feel okay. He felt ashamed. Days passed. Then weeks. Greg found it hard to go to work. Found it hard to smile when people asked how fatherhood was going. He didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to explain the ache in his chest. He tried to ignore it, to stay busy, but the more he watched Aiden spin those toy wheels, the more the memories haunted him. One afternoon, Greg walked past a playground. He saw a boy sitting alone on a bench, covering his ears while others played. A younger boy ran by and shouted, "Weirdo!" Greg stopped in his tracks. He turned, walked over to the boy, and sat beside him. The boy didn't look up. Greg just sat there. "I have a son," he said quietly. "His name's Aiden. He's just like you." The boy blinked but said nothing. Greg stared at the swings. "I used to be mean to kids like you. I didn't understand. I thought I was better, but I wasn't. I was afraid. Afraid of what I didn't get." The boy finally looked up. Greg smiled softly. "You're not weird," he said. "You're just wired differently. And that's okay." The boy looked away again. Greg stood up. "Take care, buddy." He walked back to his car and cried. From that day, something in him changed. He started reading everything he could about autism. He watched videos, joined support groups, went to Aiden's therapy sessions, sat through every appointment and asked questions. He apologized to Stephanie, told her about the boys he had teased when he was younger. "I was awful," he said. "You didn't know," she said gently, "but I should have." That week, Greg looked up Tommy on Facebook. He found him, sent him a message. "Hi Tommy. You probably don't remember me, but I was in your class years ago. I said some horrible things back then. I need to tell you I'm sorry. My son was just diagnosed with autism, and now I see how wrong I was. I hope you're doing well." He didn't expect a reply, but a few days later, one came. "I remember you, and I forgive you. I hope your son grows up knowing how strong he is." Greg stared at the screen, then smiled through his tears. He had spent years being the loudest in the room, the strongest, the most popular, but now, the quietest boy in the class had taught him the most important lesson of his life, and it had taken his own son to open his eyes. The sun rose slowly over the sleepy suburb where Greg and Stephanie lived. It was quiet still, with only the soft rustle of tree branches and the hum of birds. Inside their house, Greg sat on the floor of Aiden's room, watching his son spin. The same red toy car again and again. Spin. Stop. Spin. Stop. Greg no longer tried to stop him. Instead, he watched closely. He tried to understand why the spinning brought Aiden comfort. Why the colors, the motion, it was all so calming to him. It wasn't a game. It was peace. Greg looked at his son, really looked, and realized he didn't need Aiden to be like other kids. He needed to meet Aiden where he was. That morning, Stephanie came in with 2 mugs of coffee. She sat beside Greg on the floor. "He's calmer with you these days," she whispered. Greg nodded slowly. "I think I'm calmer with him too." Stephanie leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for trying. I know it's not what we imagined." Greg looked at his little boy. "No," he said, "but maybe it's what we needed." For the first time, he truly meant it. At Aiden's next therapy session, Greg went alone. Stephanie had a shift at the hospital, so he promised to handle it. The office was warm, filled with soft toys, colorful books, and posters that said things like "different is not less." A woman named Sarah greeted them with a gentle smile. She had been working with Aiden for a few weeks now, doing speech therapy and basic play interaction. But this time, Greg asked if he could stay in the room. "Of course," Sarah said. kindly. We actually encourage that, Greg sat in the corner, quiet, observing. She laid out a few toys blocks, puzzles, and a picture chart. Aiden didn't look at her. He went straight to the spinning wheel toy. Sarah didn't stop him. She let him play for a few minutes, then slowly joined him on the floor. She didn't force eye contact. She didn't speak loudly. She just mirrored his play. When Aiden tapped the wheel, she tapped it too. When he hummed, she hummed back. Greg watched in amazement. After a few minutes, Aiden paused, looked at her briefly, then went back to spinning. He saw her. Greg whispered to himself. Sarah looked up and smiled at him. That's a win, she said. On the ride home, Greg looked at his son in the rear-view mirror. Aiden was chewing on a soft toy, flapping his hands lightly. Greg remembered when he used to laugh at those things, when he thought flapping was strange or annoying. Now, it was just Aiden's way of showing excitement. It was beautiful. When they got home, Greg turned off the radio and opened the windows. The cool air filled the car as he spoke softly. You're doing amazing, little guy. Aiden didn't answer, of course, but Greg wasn't expecting him to. He was learning to speak Aiden's language, even if it didn't come with words. That weekend, Stephanie came home with a surprise. I signed us up for a parent support group, she said. Greg raised an eyebrow. Like, a meeting? Yes, tomorrow afternoon. It's for families with kids on the spectrum. I think it'll be good. Greg hesitated. The idea of sitting in a room with strangers and talking about feelings didn't excite him, but he saw the hope in her eyes, so he agreed. The meeting was in the community center, in a room with soft chairs and a table full of coffee and snacks. There were about 10 other parents, moms, dads, couples. Some looked tired, some looked hopeful. They introduced themselves one by one. I'm Megan. My daughter was diagnosed at 4. She doesn't speak yet, but she's learning to sign. I'm Paul. My son is high-functioning, but school has been hard. When it was Greg's turn, he paused. I'm Greg, he said slowly. My son Aiden was diagnosed a few months ago. He's 2.5. He looked around the room. I used to. I mean, when I was younger, I wasn't kind to kids like Aiden. I made jokes, teased them. I didn't understand. And now, his voice cracked. Now I wish I could take it all back. A quiet nod came from across the room. One mother wiped her eyes. We've all made mistakes, someone said gently. Greg felt a wave of warmth he hadn't expected. These people understood. That night, he and Stephanie lay in bed, talking for hours. I feel like I'm changing, Greg whispered. You are, she said softly. And that's what makes you a good dad. Greg smiled, tears in his eyes. It wasn't easy, but he was trying. The next few months were filled with learning. Aiden started using picture cards to communicate. He'd hand Greg a card with a cup when he was thirsty, or one with a blanket when he was tired. Each small success felt like winning the lottery. One day, Aiden came to Greg and handed him a card that said hug. Greg froze, then knelt down. You want a hug? He asked softly. Aiden looked at him. Just for a second. Greg opened his arms, and Aiden stepped into them. It lasted only 3 seconds, but Greg would remember it forever. At work, things changed too. Greg used to laugh at the sensitivity training his boss made everyone take. Now, he spoke up during meetings. When a coworker joked about a customer being slow, Greg cleared his throat and said, Hey, that's not cool. They looked at him strangely. What's your problem? Greg stood up. My son's autistic, and he's the smartest, bravest kid I know. They never made that joke again. Greg also started volunteering at Aiden's therapy center. He'd help set up events, clean up, play with the other kids during group sessions. The staff loved him. The kids trusted him. He'd crouch down and talk gently, slowly, without pressure. Just like he did with Aiden, he became known as the dad who gets it. One day, a new mom came in, holding a toddler who screamed when the lights flickered. She looked overwhelmed, almost ready to cry. Greg walked over and knelt beside her. Hi, he said softly. You're not alone, I promise. She looked at him, eyes wide, and she believed him. Later that week, Greg got a message on Facebook. It was from Caleb, the boy with the headphones. Hey man, I heard you reached out to Tommy. He told me. Took me a while to believe it was real. But I saw your post about your son. I just wanted to say I'm glad you're learning. Some people never do. Greg stared at the message for a long time. Then, he replied, thank you. I'm sorry for everything. Caleb replied with just 3 words, I forgive you. That night, Greg sat outside under the stars. Aiden was asleep. Stephanie was reading. The world was quiet. He thought about who he used to be and who he was becoming. He had spent so much of his life mocking what he didn't understand, pushing away anything that made him uncomfortable. But now he was living in it, loving it, fighting for it, and he wouldn't go back. He picked up his phone and opened a new note. He typed one sentence. My son taught me what strength really looks like, and for the first time in a long time, he felt proud of the man he was becoming. Winter came quietly. Snow began to fall over the rooftops. The streets were soft and white. Inside their home, Greg watched the flakes through the window as Aiden pressed his face against the cold glass. He likes the patterns, Stephanie whispered beside him. Greg nodded. Everything is a pattern to him. The snowflakes, the flicker of the TV, the sound of a spoon tapping a bowl, it all meant something to Aiden. And now, it meant something to Greg too. He had started to notice the small things, the tiny shifts in Aiden's behavior, the way his eyes moved when he was overwhelmed, the way he flapped his hands when something excited him. There was beauty in every movement, but there were still hard days. One afternoon, while shopping at the supermarket, Aiden suddenly started screaming, loud, sharp, uncontrollable. Greg had only turned for a second to grab a bag of apples. When he turned back, Aiden was on the floor, kicking, crying, covering his ears. The lights were too bright, the music too loud. A cart nearby had made a sharp squeaking noise, and that had been enough to tip him over the edge. People stared, a few whispered. One older woman shook her head and said, someone needs to discipline that child. Greg took a deep breath. His old self would have said something rude, maybe even snapped back, but not this time. He knelt beside his son, pulled out his noise-canceling headphones from the backpack, and placed them gently over Aiden's ears. He whispered soothing words, you're okay, buddy. I'm right here. It's just too loud, huh? He rocked him slowly. After a few minutes, Aiden calmed. The tears stopped. His breathing slowed. Greg picked him up, held him close, and turned to the people watching. He's autistic, he said clearly, his voice calm but firm. This isn't bad behavior. It's sensory overload. The woman who made the comment looked away. Another mom nearby gave him a soft nod of support. Greg left the store that day feeling drained but proud. He wasn't ashamed of his son, not anymore. That evening, after Aiden had gone to sleep, Greg sat on the couch scrolling through his old high school Facebook group. He hadn't looked at it in years. There were pictures from senior year, football games, pep rallies, parties, and then one post from years ago, a blurry photo of Caleb wearing headphones, standing alone in the hallway. Under it, someone had written, DJ Weirdo, dropping sick beats no one can hear. It had dozens of laughing reactions. Greg's name was in the comments. Maybe he's just buffering, he had typed. He stared at it now, feeling sick. He clicked the 3 dots and deleted his comment, then deleted the entire post. Then he did something harder. He posted something new. Back in high school, I made fun of people I didn't understand. I joked about things I didn't know. Now, I'm a father to a beautiful boy with autism, and I want to say, I'm sorry. I was wrong, and I'm doing better now. He hit post and put the phone down. The next morning, there were over 200 likes, dozens of comments, some from people he had bullied, some from classmates who now had kids with autism too. One girl wrote, "This made me cry." Thank you for saying it, another wrote. Takes real courage to admit this. Respect, Greg closed his eyes. He didn't want applause, he wanted healing, but maybe this was part of it. In the months that followed, Aiden continued to grow. He still didn't speak much, but he made more eye contact. He used more picture cards. Sometimes, he even smiled when Greg came home from work. Those tiny moments meant everything. One night, Greg sat with Aiden on the floor building a tower of blocks, red, blue, green, yellow. Aiden pointed to the blue block, looked at Greg, then tapped the picture card for blue. Greg laughed gently. Yes, that's blue. You did it. Aiden flapped his hands excitedly, then stacked the blue block on top. Stephanie came in, holding her phone. I got it on video, she whispered. They watched it 3 times that night. Another night, Greg found an old box of letters from his childhood. Tucked inside was a drawing he made in 2nd grade. It was a picture of a boy holding a trophy with the words, I want to be the best dad ever. He hadn't thought about that dream in years, but now, he wanted it again. Not the perfect dad, not the popular dad, the best dad for Aiden. Greg started reading everything he could about autism. He joined online forums, followed blogs, attended conferences with Stephanie. He learned about sensory diets, speech delays, echolalia, emotional regulation. He even began sharing his story publicly. He spoke at local schools, told his story at church. Once, he was invited to talk at a community event for Autism Awareness Month. Standing on the small stage, holding a microphone, Greg looked out at the crowd. He started with one sentence, I used to be the problem. Gasps, silence. Then, he told them everything, his jokes, his past, his regrets, and then he told them about Aiden, the boy who changed his life. The room was quiet when he finished. A few tears, some clapping. One teenage boy walked up to him afterward. My brother's autistic, he said. I always tried to hide it from my friends, but now, I think I want to be more like you. Greg hugged him. Be more like him, he whispered. Be more like Aiden. At home, things weren't always easy. There were still meltdowns, still sleepless nights, still days when Aiden wouldn't eat or would only wear one shirt because the others felt wrong. But Greg no longer saw these things as problems. They were part of the journey, and he was grateful to walk it. One day, Aiden surprised them all. He was sitting with a speech therapist, playing with toys, when he suddenly pointed to a toy cow and said clearly, Moo. Stephanie dropped her cup. Greg's eyes widened. The therapist gasped. Aiden, Greg said softly, what did you say? Aiden tapped the cow again. Moo. Tears streamed down Greg's face. It wasn't a full sentence. It wasn't a conversation, but it was a beginning. That night, as they tucked Aiden into bed, Greg kissed his son's forehead. You're amazing, he whispered. Aiden blinked up at him, then said, Dada. Greg froze. Stephanie's hand flew to her mouth. He looked into his son's eyes. You said, Dada? Aiden smiled. One word, one perfect, life-changing word. Greg turned off the light, walked into the hallway, and broke down in tears. The kind of tears that came from deep joy, deep love, and deep change. His son had given him the greatest gift of all, not just a word, but a new heart, a new beginning, a new reason to be proud. And Greg knew he would never go back to who he was, because love had changed everything. It had been 2 years since Aiden said his first word. Since then, every day had been a small adventure. Sometimes he would say blue when he wanted his favorite plate. Other days he'd say no with a strong shake of his head when he didn't want vegetables. He still didn't talk much. But Greg didn't care. Every sound, every gesture, every connection, it was a miracle. Greg had learned to speak Aiden's language, not with just words, but with patience. He could tell what kind of day it would be by the way Aiden walked into the room. If he was pacing and flapping his hands, it meant he was excited. If he was quiet and covering his ears, it meant a tough day ahead. But one thing never changed. Greg loved him more every day. Still, even love faces hard tests, and Greg's test came on a bright April afternoon. It started with a phone call from work. Hey Greg, the senior manager's position just opened up. You've been here long enough. We're considering you. Greg sat up straight in his chair. Me? Yeah. You're a solid worker, reliable, loyal. But there's a catch. Greg's heart sank. Of course, there's always a catch. The position's in Boston. Boston, 3 hours away from home, from Aiden's school, from Stephanie's parents, from everything Aiden had grown comfortable with. Greg cleared his throat. I appreciate the offer. Can I have some time to think about it? Sure, his boss said, but don't take too long. They'll start interviewing in 2 weeks. That night, Greg sat at the table staring at his laptop. Boston meant more money, more security, better insurance. It meant a bigger house, better future, less stress. But it also meant change, big change. He looked across the room. Aiden was lining up his toy cars, whispering their colors softly. Red, 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 blue, yellow. Change was not something Aiden handled well. Even moving a chair could cause panic. Greg rubbed his hands together and let out a sigh. Stephanie sat beside him, reading the room. What's wrong? He told her everything. Her eyes softened. She nodded slowly. It's a great opportunity, but it might break him, she finished. They both knew how far Aiden had come. He finally trusted his teachers. He had a speech therapist who understood him, a sensory gym he loved, familiar sidewalks, quiet neighbors. Greg ran a hand through his hair. I don't want to lose this chance, but I also don't want to push him backward. Stephanie reached for his hand. Let's think on it. The next day, Greg took Aiden on a walk. They went to the park where Aiden liked to swing. They walked the same path they always did, same trees, same benches, same duck pond. Suddenly, a loud engine roared behind them. A construction truck. Aiden froze. His eyes went wide. Then he dropped to the ground and covered his ears, screaming. Greg knelt beside him. It's okay, buddy. Just a truck. It's going away now. But Aiden was in full panic. It took nearly 15 minutes to calm him down. Later that night, Greg sat beside Aiden's bed. His son was finally asleep. He looked peaceful again. Greg whispered, How would you handle Boston, buddy? He didn't need an answer. He already knew. The next morning, he called his boss. I really appreciate the offer, he said, but I have to decline. My son needs consistency right now, and I won't be the kind of father who chooses a title over his child. There was silence. Then, I respect that, Greg. Really. When he hung up, Greg felt something lift from his shoulders. He had made the right choice, but not everyone saw it that way. Later that week, he ran into an old friend from high school at the gas station. Hey, Greg. Long time. They chatted a bit, then the friend asked, So what's new? Got promoted yet? Greg smiled. Actually, I turned down a promotion recently. Would have meant moving. Why'd you say no? My son has autism. Stability is more important for him right now. The friend blinked. Really? Wow, that's a lot. I don't think I could handle that. Greg felt something twist in his chest. You could, he said softly. You just don't know it yet. The friend laughed awkwardly. I mean, don't kids grow out of that stuff? No, Greg said. It's not something to grow out of. It's something you grow with. He got in his car and drove away, his hands tight on the wheel. He wasn't angry, just tired of explaining, tired of ignorance. But he reminded himself he used to be just like that. He used to think autism was something weird, something to be mocked or fixed. Now he knew better, and he wanted to help others know better too. The next day, Stephanie handed him a flyer. Parent panel at the local school next month. They're asking for parents of autistic children to speak. Greg stared at it. He thought of that friend at the gas station, thought of all the people who didn't understand. Then he nodded. I'll do it. The night of the event, the gym was full of parents and teachers. Greg stood up nervously. He had never liked public speaking, but he wasn't speaking for himself. He was speaking for Aiden. I used to make fun of kids like mine, he began. I used to think they were weird, that they were broken. Now I know better. He told them about Aiden's quiet world, about the sounds that hurt him, the textures he avoided, the patterns he loved. He told them about meltdowns and miracles, about how he almost chose a promotion over his son's peace, and how, in the end, loved one, he finished with this. My son doesn't need to be normal, he needs to be understood, accepted, loved exactly as he is. And I thank God every day for the chance to do that. The room was quiet. Then came the applause. People stood. Some wiped their eyes. Afterward, a young mom came up, holding a baby. My daughter was just diagnosed, she said. I've been so scared, but your story gave me hope. Greg looked at the child in her arms. Don't be scared, he said. You're about to discover a new kind of love, one that teaches you to slow down, listen better, and see beauty in small things. She smiled. Thank you. He went home that night, crawled into bed beside Stephanie, and stared at the ceiling. I think I'm changing, she turned to him. No, we've already changed. He didn't argue, he just smiled because deep down, he knew she was right. The classroom was filled with drawings, rainbows, stars, smiling stick figures. Each paper was pinned neatly to the wall. Some were a little crooked, some were colored outside the lines, but every one of them was beautiful. Greg stood in the corner, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the artwork. He spotted Aiden's piece right away. Aiden had drawn a house with 5 windows, 3 trees, a sun with a smiley face, and something that looked like a cat with wings. He had signed it in big, wobbly letters. IDN.IT was the first time Greg had seen his son write his own name by himself. His throat tightened. Stephanie came beside him. You okay? He nodded, barely holding back the emotion. This feels bigger than any promotion I ever wanted. The teacher clapped her hands at the front of the room. Parents, thank you for coming to our art show. Our students have worked so hard. Now, the children will sing a little song they've been practicing. Greg's heart skipped. He knew Aiden hated loud noises. He didn't like crowds. He didn't always join group activities. But just as the music started, Aiden stepped forward with the rest of the class. He didn't sing every word. Sometimes he just mouthed them. But he stood there. He tried. And near the end of the song, his voice rang out soft and clear. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Greg's eyes filled with tears. He squeezed Stephanie's hand tightly. After the event, they walked outside into the warm afternoon light. Aiden walked a little ahead, humming the melody. Then he turned around and looked up at Greg. Daddy, I sang. Greg knelt, arms open. Yes, you did. And it was perfect. Aiden ran into his hug. It was one of those rare, unexpected hugs Aiden gave on his own. Greg held him close, breathing in the moment. In that quiet embrace, Greg thought about everything, the jokes he used to make, the people he used to mock, the pride he used to carry. All of it felt so far away now, because the boy in his arms had changed him, taught him patience, taught him gentleness, taught him how to love without expecting anything back. That evening, they had pizza at home. Aiden's favorite. After bedtime, Greg sat alone on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand. Watching the stars, he thought about writing a post on social media. To say something real, something honest, something that might help someone else. He opened his laptop and began typing. I used to laugh at kids with autism. I used to think they were weird. Then my son was diagnosed, and he taught me more about love, life, and strength than I ever learned from books or business meetings. He is kind. He is brave. He is unique. And if you don't understand autism, don't judge it. Listen, learn, be better. I was once blind, but now I see. He hit post. Almost immediately, people began reacting. Old friends, strangers, parents. Some shared their stories. Some thanked him for his honesty. Some said they had been afraid to speak about their own children. Greg felt something shift inside him. He realized this wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning of a new one where he used his voice to raise others. To tell the truth. To help people like Aiden be seen for who they are, not for who others expect them to be. Weeks later, Greg was invited to speak at a local awareness event for World Autism Month. He stood at the front of a small auditorium, lights warm on his face. Stephanie and Aiden in the front row. I used to mock, he began. Now I advocate, he told his story, like he had before, but this time, something was different. He wasn't just telling what happened, he was inviting others to walk with him. At the end, he said, autism isn't a problem to fix, it's a difference to understand. And love is the bridge. People stood and clapped. Aiden ran up to him, arms open. Greg lifted him high and kissed his forehead. I love you, buddy. I love you too, Daddy, Aiden whispered. And that was everything. Not long after, Greg started a small community group for dads raising autistic children. He called it Strong Fathers. Different roads. It grew quickly. One father said, I didn't know other men felt like me. Another said, I thought I had to stay tough. But it's okay to cry, right? Greg smiled. It's more than okay. It means you care. A few months later, Greg received a message from someone he hadn't spoken to in years. It was Luke, the boy he once teased in middle school, the one he mocked for being weird. Luke had seen the post. He had read the article that came after, and now he wanted to meet. Greg agreed. They met at a quiet cafe near town. Luke walked in tall, confident, dressed in a blue button-up shirt. Greg stood up, nervous. Luke, I'm so sorry. Luke smiled softly. You were a kid. We both were. I had no excuse. No, but you learned. That means more than anything. They sat, talked, shared stories. Greg learned Luke had gone on to become a therapist working with kids on the spectrum. You're helping kids like Aiden, Greg said. Luke nodded. And kids like me. They shook hands at the end, a real handshake, full of respect, not pity, full of forgiveness. That night, Greg came home and found Aiden asleep, hugging a plush fox. He sat beside his bed and whispered, You changed me, kid. You made me better. The moonlight shone on Aiden's peaceful face. Outside, the world was noisy, busy, impatient. But in that small room, there was calm, there was healing, there was love, and Greg knew, deep in his heart, that this wasn't just a story about autism. It was a story about growth, about second chances, and about learning that the very people we once didn't understand might be the ones who show us who we really are. The end.